I have nothing against taxing the rich, but most people are so focused on taxing the rich that they're not paying attention how the government is ripping off the average American. Literally, as you're watching this video, the government is ripping off every single taxpayer in the United States. Because if it wasn't for Social Security and the payroll tax, the average American should have retired with millions of dollars in their bank account. They're supposed to be so rich that they wouldn't even need Social Security in the first place. So here in this video, I'm not going to simply throw some words. What I will do is that I'm going to give you the facts and the numbers. I will show you everything from A to Z, and you will judge by yourself. But I'm going to make a very good disclaimer that this video is going to be painful to watch because you will realize that you are paying so much in taxes and yet you get absolutely nothing in return. And if the system was slightly designed in a different way, you're supposed to be a multi-millionaire. So if you're emotionally ready to find this out, then give this video a thumbs up and let's get right into it. The point of Social Security is very simple and straightforward. Today, you are young and you can work, so you're going to pay taxes so that when you get old, the government is going to take care of you. But the government simply doesn't take care of you. You are going to pay taxes or a payroll tax for your entire adult life or the entire life that you can work, and then that money will slowly be paying you back so that you won't end up in the streets. That makes logical sense. That's the point of taxes in the first place, right? It seems like the government is taking care of the poor person, of the average American, so that he won't end up in the streets with no money left in his pockets at all. But this system is rigged in the first place. This system is actually ripping off every single American. Let me show you. You're paying 12.4% in payroll tax. That's like 6.2% that you pay and 6.2% that your employer is paying. Some people might say, well, I'm simply paying 6.2%. But when your employer offering that job for you, he's including the fact that he's supposed to pay you an extra 6.2% in payroll tax or supposed to pay on behalf of you to the government. So that's already part of the income that you receive. In total, out of that income that you receive every single month or every single year, 12.4% goes directly into the government for your payroll tax. So assuming that you're making the average wage, which is $66,100, and if we tax that at 12.4%, every single year you are paying a little over $8,000 in payroll tax. Of course, your income doesn't stay still. It grows every single year. So let's take the average number. 5% annually your income rises. By the time you are going to retire, which is let's say 44 years from now, let's assume that you finished college, you finished school, you went to college, you graduated, and you are 23 years old and you start working until the time that you retire. When I'm recording this video, the retirement age is like 67 years old. So you're going to work for the next 44 years and you will pay in taxes $1.3 million. This is just payroll tax. We did not include income tax, which is going to be significantly higher than this number. This money that you pay, which is $1.2 million, is the amount of money that should directly go into making sure that you have a safety net when you retire, which means that you're supposed to get this money back at least, if not more than that, because at any given time, there are far more people who are working than the number of people who are retiring. So logically, you're supposed to get at least $1.2 million or $1 million, $238,000 to be more precise. But let's take a look at what's happening in reality. In reality, if you take the Social Security right now, the average person makes around $23,000 in Social Security payments right now. That sounds like a lot of money. But you have to consider the fact that you're not going to live for an extra 44 years. Because if you retire at the age of let's say 67, which is literally the retirement age in the United States right now. In the best case scenario, you are going to live until you're like 83 or 84 years old. And if you actually make it until you're 84 years, that is fantastic. You literally made it to 84 years. The vast majority of people don't make it, because if you take the average lifespan of an average American male in the United States, it's literally below 80. But if you actually made it to 60, chances that you will make it to 80 are very high. So the average person who is going to receive the Social Security will be receiving Social Security for the next 17 years when they retire. But Social Security payments, just like your income, are being adjusted to inflation. On average, they are being adjusted by 2.2% annually. Some years, they increase them significantly when we have high inflation, such as the case in 2022. But on average, it's around 2.2%. So if we adjust it by 2.2%, and you will be receiving the Social Security for the next 17 years until you retire, you will get a total amount of $468,000. And that is the first problem that I have with Social Security. I end up paying $1.2 million, but I will be receiving $468,000. And now imagine we have people who make $100,000, $200,000, and those people make or pay in payroll tax much more than the average person who makes $66,000. So the more you make, the more taxes you pay, the more you're getting ripped off, which is actually absolutely insane if you think about it. But this is just the beginning. If we actually dig into those numbers, it gets significantly worse than this, because you have to understand that time has value. The longer, the sooner you receive that money, the more advantage you can take out of that money. So Social Security, when they receive your money, they do something with that money. That money simply does not stay there in the Social Security account. Most of the time, that money is being invested in the most secure assets out there. And what is the most secure asset that we have? US Treasury bills, which on average, they get around 2.5% in interest. So Social Security system is already using your money and making a profit on the money that you pay today and earning interest. The money that they're supposed to pay you should be significantly higher than $1.2 million, but in reality, you will just get less than $500,000. So let's just consider the opportunity cost. What if you took that money and you invested that money in the S&P 500? How much that money would be in reality? If you receive that money, let's say that the government today will tell you that you have an option. Either you will put your money into the Social Security, or here's an account where you will take 12.4% of that money and it will be invested in the S&P 500. Now, S&P 500 is the most safest investment in the stock market. We are not going into some kind of individual stocks where stocks can rise by 15%, 20%, 100%, or in the case of Nvidia, where it can rise by 5,000%. We're not taking those kind of astronomical returns of some stocks that can actually go. Now, if you're a really great investor, if you're a professional investor, if you're part of our academy, yes, you can find such stocks and you will be making millions of dollars. But we are talking about the average person. So instead of investing it into the Social Security, we assume that you will take the exact same amount, which is 12.4% of the average income, and this money is going to be invested in the stock market for the next 44 years. So again, the exact same example, this number will be growing by 5% annually because that is the average wage. So again, we are giving you the example of not somebody who is making like few $100,000. We're literally taking the average wage in the US, assuming that you will be getting 10% annually, which is historically what the S&P 500 has been doing over the last 50 to 70 years. That number will be growing to almost $12 million. Yes, this is the total interest that you will be receiving if you invest that money into the S&P 500 instead of investing it into the Social Security, because you will be getting around 10% annually. But some people might say, wait a second, 10% is too much. Let's be a bit more realistic. What if the market crashes? What if the next 50 years are not going to be as great as the last 100 years? In that scenario, Let's take 7%. Let's be a bit more pessimistic about it. At the end of the tunnel, you will end up with $5 million. Yes, $5 million of investments in your bank account if you invest the exact same amount of money into the S&P 500 instead of the Social Security. And here's the great part. If you end up with $5 million, you don't have to cash out the entire $5 million the moment you retire. You can literally just cash out 10% of that money every single year and let it grow by itself after that. So 10% out of $5 million annually is like $500,000. Wait a second. Wasn't like amount of money that they pay you throughout the total time that you receive your Social Security for 17 years is less than $500,000? So in a single year, you will be receiving more from your investments in the S&P 500 than people who kept their money into the Social Security for 17 years. 1 year more money than you would get in 17 years from Social Security. But let's be a bit more pessimistic. Let's say that the next 100 years are going to be some of the worst years in the entire history of the stock market, where the US economy is not going to grow as much as it did in the last 100 years, where the growth is going to be half the growth that it was in the last 100 years. Let's say that it's going to be simply 5%. In that scenario, your investments are going to grow to a little over $3 million. Even in this scenario, if you withdraw just 10% out of your a little over $3 million, you will end up annually with $300,000, which is pretty good amount of money for you to retire every single year. Even if you consider inflation, $300,000 is going to be a lot of money. Again, we took the worst possible scenario, which is 5%. If we take a much realistic scenario, or the scenario where the S&P 500 has grown historically by 10%, you will end up with almost $12 million. And if you withdraw 10% of that, that's over $1 million annually. That's pretty much enough money for anybody to retire anywhere in the world, even if you live in some of the most expensive cities in the US. And here's the best thing. You can pass down this amount of money to your children. So not only that you will become a millionaire by the time you retire, even if you are on the average wage, your kids are going to be multi-millionaires and they don't have to work another day in their entire lives. Whereas if you are on Social Security, the moment you're gone, those extra Social Security paychecks that you did not receive throughout your entire life will not be given to your kids. They will not be given to anybody. They will simply become a property of the government, and the government will use it on something that they consider is much better, like increasing their wages, for example. Do you see why Social Security is not actually the best system for us? And most of the money that is being invested or being taxed in the Social Security when you pay payroll tax isn't directly going to help you. Social Security is already investing your money, but where that money is going to? Why aren't you the owner of that money when the purpose of the payroll tax was in the first place to make you rich, to provide you with a safety net, to provide you with a good retirement? But that's not happening because God knows where that money is going. So if we conclude that at the end of the day, or you are paying $1.2 million, but you are getting less than $500,000, when in reality you're supposed to get almost $12 million in investments at the end of your retirement. And now tell me, is this system fair? Is this system fair for the average American? And here's the thing. I'm not actually worried about rich people because rich people are already in the stock market. They're already investing. They already know which asset they should buy, which stock they should buy. It's the average American who's getting screwed because the average American believes that, oh, he's paying the 12.4% in payroll tax and he's absolutely safe because by the time he will retire, the government is going to take care of him. That is probably the biggest lie that I have or anybody has ever heard, which is the government will take care of you. That's why rich people are already building their safety net. They're already investing in the stock market. And every rich person perfectly knows how the stock market works, which is why they're getting way more than 8%. Sometimes they get 11%, 12%, 14%. And that's why I encourage everybody to start investing and first of all, learn how to invest, learn how the market works, master the stock market and start as early as possible. but the average American, unfortunately, will never actually invest. And even if he invests, he's not going to hold a lot of stocks because he simply does not understand how the stock market works. But it gets much worse because the entire system is about to collapse. If you thought these were just the bad news, then you're mistaken, my friend, because it's about to get significantly worse than you can imagine. The Social Security system was created back in 1935. And the purpose was that it's not about you paying taxes so that when you retire, you are going to get paid. That was not the point of Social Security. The point of Social Security was that today you are going to work hard and you will be funding the old people who are retired, so that when you get old, then the younger generation are going to fund you. And that is the problem with the Social Security. So it doesn't matter how much you pay. We cannot call Social Security a scam because, yes, you are paying so much taxes so that you can retire, but that's not how it works. You are directly funding the people who are going to retire. And the system worked back in the days because back in the days when the system was created, the vast majority of the population were young and working, and there was a small minority of the population that were retiring. So this group of people could easily sustain this group of people. For every single person that would retire, there were 5 people who would work. So the government made a very great case. Some of that money would go into actually paying their retirees, but a big chunk of that money would go for other government services. But the system worked because there were so many people who were working. There were so many young people who would pay taxes, and there were very few people who would actually receive Social Security benefits. And now let's take this and compare it to what's happening today. The number of older people have grown dramatically, and the number of people who are about to become at working age are much less than they were back in the days. Do you see how the graph or the pyramid changed dramatically? Now we have tens of millions of people who are about to retire. And right now, there are, for every single person who is going to retire, there are less than 3 people who are going to sustain them. And this number is expected to go to less than 2 by 2035. So back in the days when the system was created, 5 people are working to fund 1 elderly people who is retiring. But today, it's a little over 2 people who are funding 1 elderly people. And as time goes by, more people are getting old, less people are giving birth, and there are less young people who are getting into the workforce to sustain the older and the retirees, which means that we have to raise taxes on the younger generation who are working in order to make sure that this entire system does not collapse. Back in the days, the birth rate was much higher. But the birth rate today is less than 2. It's like 1.66 per woman, which means that mathematically, if we do the math, the system is going to collapse whether you like it or not. Can you solve this problem overnight? Absolutely not. Most of the most advanced countries in the world, including European countries, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, are suffering from the exact same problem. And if you look at the percentage of population age above 65, then it is growing dramatically and it will continue to grow, which creates a huge problem. Which is why what is going to happen most likely is that they will simply raise the retirement age. Right now, it's around 67. They will grow it to 70, which means that less people will receive the retirement benefits. Now imagine for a moment how many people or the number of people who are paying their entire lives payroll tax, but they don't end up living above 67, which means that they've paid so much taxes but never enjoyed a dime of the benefits out of their retirement, which is insane, right? And where does that money goes to? Do you think they will take it and will pass it down to the children of that person? Well, absolutely not. Nobody actually cares about that. Which is why if they raise the retirement age from 67 to 70, less people will be receiving the retirement benefits, which means that the system can sustain a bit longer. But again, it's a matter of time before the entire system collapses. And that's why you hear a lot of news that by the time or maybe by the year 2035, the Social Security system will be in such a condition where they will have to cut the benefits to the retirees by at least 20% in order to prevent the collapse of the system. But some people might say, wait a second. The US government is so rich. The United States is insanely rich. There are trillions of dollars that get into the government. Maybe they can take a portion of those taxes, or maybe a portion of income taxes, and pay the retirees so that this entire system does not collapse because there are not enough young people to pay the payroll tax to sustain the older generation. Well, let's take a look at the numbers and do the math. Let's literally just go into the numbers and find out whether it's possible. The government received $1.7 trillion in payroll taxes and paid in social securities $1.5 trillion. So there is a surplus of $200 billion, which is a lot of money. Hopefully this money was safely or wisely invested at least somewhere so that it gets some returns to the government. But the problem is that there is one giant hole in the entire budget of the government that probably the government of the United States will never be able to afford that. Last year, the government made around $4.9 trillion, which is a lot of money, but it spent $6.8 trillion, and there is a deficit of $2 trillion. And the deficit this year is going to be even more than $2 trillion. It will be $2.1 trillion. And with each following year, that deficit is most likely going to keep growing. And the biggest hole in that budget is that the United States pays almost $1 trillion just to maintain its debt. Like last year, the government literally paid almost $900 billion just in interest alone to sustain the debt. Overall, it was almost $1 trillion because you can't simply just pay the interest on your debt. You at least have to pay a small portion of the principal for the debt to be maintained in one way or another. So the total payments of the debt were around $1 trillion. And that number is going to keep rising. By the year 2035, the total payments of interest of the debt will be almost $1.8 trillion. And this is the best case scenario. It could be $2 trillion. It could be $2.5 trillion because we don't know what kind of challenges the United States is going to face. If there is going to be another crisis as big as the crisis of 2020, maybe the government will have to print a few $1 trillion and borrow a few $1 trillion to maintain that crisis and make sure that the United States stays ahead of the world. Which means that 5-10 years from now, if we want to sustain the system, we have to get the money from somewhere. But can we say to the debt holders, can we say that we are no longer going to pay the interest on that debt? Well, of course not. We cannot do that. Can we cut the military in order to sustain the social security? Well, of course we cannot do that. So I don't see a single part of the budget where we can cut the cost in order to save the social security. And remember, the government is already suffering a $2 trillion deficit, which means that with every consecutive year from now onwards, the cost of borrowing money is going to be bigger and bigger, which means that if we want to borrow money to prevent the social security system from collapsing, it is going to cost much more, which is going to make the debt situation significantly worse, which means that most people right now who are paying the payroll tax will never be able to retire, which is why the only way that I see that anybody can protect himself is to stop relying on the government and start investing and building an investing portfolio that is going to guarantee him a safety net when the person is going to retire. When you are going to retire, you know that you have millions of dollars. And as you can see that you don't need millions of dollars to invest now in order to end up with millions of dollars. With some small little great investing strategies, you can actually achieve that. Even if you take all of that money and invest it simply in the S&P 500. You invest in the S&P 500 blindly without even thinking about it. You can still end up with millions of dollars. And if you want to get into individual stocks, before you do that, make sure that you educate yourself. You know exactly what you are doing. Because on one side, yes, there is an element of risk and there is a risk that you can lose your money. But if you know what you are doing, then you can make significantly more than that. So take care and make sure that you retire with millions of dollars. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.